before last fall, let's say, in my life. And I would have to say those were among the worst experiences of my life. But I'd have to say that after searching long and hard for something that was worse than depression, I finally discovered it in akathisia. Because depression was, remember we talked about that, right? And because you had suffered bouts of depression as well as the arthritis. And one definition we'd agreed on was that being depressed was like hearing that your dog had just died.
Yeah.
And remembering that continually. And then
It's
your
way
dog
worse.
died and
Yeah.
you thought that, and that was a dog you actually liked a lot. You thought, well, that's bad, but it's not nearly as bad as depression.
Not even close.
Right.
Not even close. I thought it was going to be as bad, but then my dog died and I was like, nah, depression is way worse. Sucks the joy out of absolutely everything. Can't even see colors vividly.
Mm-hmm.
Like the joy out of seeing colors, which you don't even think there's joy associated with that. But
right, because, well, with severe depression, you lose positive emotion and gain a lot of negative emotion. But with this akathisia, it was like all of the negative emotion associated with depression, plus a very high level of anxiety, plus no positive emotion at all, plus the inability to ever relax, even for a moment. And so it was...
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yes.
So watch the hell out for benzodiazepines. They're probably not your friend, or if they are, they're not your friend for very long. So,
yeah. And one of the weird things, I was prescribed lorazepam for sleep. I didn't take it very often because I found it didn't work very well. Thank goodness. But the funny thing about them, especially at a low dose, is they don't, or they didn't for me anyway, induce any type of euphoria. So when you take an opiate, when I took the OxyContin, I didn't like it, but there was some sort of high that had to do with the pain medication. But with the lorazepam, there was just an absence of something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's probably a sneakier drug to be on.
right.
Because...
Well, I think that's partly why I didn't notice what it was doing to me too, is that there was no immediate effect in the day of taking it. I mean, I stopped having that terrible reaction that we attributed to food. And so that eliminated the insomnia and the anxiety, but there was no noticeable effect from the benzodiazepines. And so I just never paid any attention to them. It never occurred to me that they could be causing me serious long-term damage.
You'd also taken SSRIs for over a decade.
Yes,
so it's like
they were very
antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication. It turns out those are not the same medications at all.
Well, and I even knew that to some degree because I knew that SSRIs, the antidepressants, were much more effective long-term treatments for panic disorder than benzodiazepines. You know, but it's quite shocking to me, actually, that I didn't know, despite my professional specialty, that I had no idea how catastrophic benzodiazepine use could be. Anyway,
well, psychologists aren't psychiatrists. Psychiatrists prescribe medications. Psychologists counsel, right?
Right, but it's still useful to keep up on the relevant literature.
Oh, now you know.
Yes, well, now I definitely, I don't think I'll forget that. Yeah. Yes. So, you know, it's funny, maybe we'll stop with this. Once I started to decrease my use of benzodiazepines, I was never tempted to go back up, except right at the beginning when I went to zero and had to.
Well, you were going to have a seizure.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
I couldn't even communicate with you.
But I thought after I got out of the Russian hospital that even if someone put a gun to my head and said, take this,
yeah,
I wouldn't.
Well,
I really think that for me, it's no overstatement to say that for me, the consequence of benzodiazepine withdrawal were worse than death. So,
yes, that's what it looked like from the outside.
Yes, well, it you know, you don't want to say something like that lightly, you know, but there were lots of times, plenty of times, when it would have been preferable, as far as I could tell, just not to be there than to experience what I was experiencing.
When you're in pain, people who are in, being at a certain level of pain is like that. Right?
Yes.
If you're walking around, anything over really like a 7 or an 8, you can't stand it.
Yeah.
So that's what it looked like from the outside.
Well, the other thing that the benzodiazepine withdrawal did that was absolutely dreadful was produce a sense of time distortion. So this was really obvious when I first woke up in Russia. Like, the first day that you and I could speak again, you were wheeling me around in the aisle of the corridor of the intensive care unit. I was going to be wheeled around until it was time to eat. And I must have asked you how many times in 10 minutes what time it was.
Probably every 45 seconds.
Yeah, probably something like that.
Yeah.
And that's because for me, it felt like, a substantial amount of time had passed, an hour or 2 hours, something like that, some terrible amount of time. And so not only was I in pain and experiencing extremely high levels of anxiety, the duration of time had extended so that it was really unbearable. It was like the days were just lasting forever. And that actually disappeared quite a bit as the akathisia disappeared. And it isn't the case now, thank God, but it was brutal. It's funny, even now, because it's somewhat stressful to have this conversation, I can feel if I lift up my eyebrows a bit, like you might when you're interested in something. I can feel the tremors in my forehead, and that's partly stress-induced. So we should probably stop talking.
Yeah, okay. We can call it a day.
Yes. Well, it was good to be able to sit here and have this conversation.
We're going to go eat a steak.
That's the theory.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for talking with me.
Well, thanks for being here. It's been a hell of a year.
Thanks for your help, too.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to give up. And now we're in Belgrade and seem to have found an answer. Thank God.